Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at a Chinese red wine. This is Chateau Vegani's Earl of Lanshan 929 Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon and Marselean blend. The winery set up relatively recently in 2014 by somebody called Zhang Yi. Mr. Yi has been involved in viticulture in the Ningxia area for about 20 years prior to setting up his own estate. So somebody who has been one of the pioneers of this area. There's some slightly conflicting information about the estate. It says it's a boutique winery. The information I have says they have 53 hectares of vines, which would tie in with a boutique winery, and then qualifies the 53 hectares as saying 800 acres. So I'm assuming that it's the 800 acres should actually read 80 acres, but it's possible that they've got 530 hectares. The estate's in the village of Ganchengzi. Probably said incorrectly, so my apologies to anybody watching who actually speaks Chinese. And this is in the central and southern part of the Eastern Helan Mountains wine region. So we're in Ningxia, and the Helan Mountains provide shelter for the vines from cold winds coming down from the north from Mongolia. As far as the terroir is concerned, the soils here are a light grey limestone with plentiful gravel, and the temperatures, the quite high summer temperatures, are moderated by fairly constant breezes. So we have soil in terms of the limestone that can retain water quite well, yet isn't too vigorous. The friable gravel stops it from giving too much water back to the plant, and the higher temperatures that you can get in summer in Ningxia are somewhat moderated by these cooling winds. The vineyard's farmed organically, by which they mean they're not using any pesticides, any chemical fertilizers or any herbicides. There's quite an emphasis on use of technology, so I'm assuming by that they're talking about sort of water monitoring, and they're talking about careful work in the vineyards to reduce yields. Fruit's all picked by hand, which is pretty normal for Ningxia, and actually they make a point that restricting both fertilizer applications, so presumably dung if they're doing that organically, and also restricting water inputs, because Ningxia you need to irrigate because actually evaporation exceeds rainfall in this area most years. And that keeps yields down. Again, I'm not completely sure that the information I have is technically correct when it comes to numbers, because their suggestion is that yields are kept down to 40 kilograms per hectare. Now that seems incredibly low. I think 4 tons per hectare would actually be pretty low, so that's probably the level it's at, and we've missed a decimal point somewhere in this information. But nevertheless, there's an emphasis on fruit quality, and the estate doesn't use fruit that they buy from anybody else. They grow all their own. The design of the new winery is set up so that every movement can be achieved by gravity. So the fruit is hand-picked. It's taken to the winery where it's de-stemmed and crushed, although some of the fruit may be left as whole bunches. And so this starts at the top level of the winery. Crushed fruit is allowed to flow down into the stainless steel fermenting tanks. As I say, I believe a portion of the fruit is left as whole bunch, and also there seems to be a suggestion that there may be a pre-fermentation cold maceration for some lots, and that would make sense. That would be trying to emphasize the aromas and give the wine good colour without extracting too much harsh tannin. Temperature control is used during fermentation, and that prevents the extraction of too harsh a tannin at higher temperatures. This wine's a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon and Marselean. Cabernet Sauvignon tends to get a very ripe style in the Helan Mountains, and actually Marselean works really quite well here because it's a variety that's better suited to these warm climates. Marselean is a crossing from the 1960s, developed in southern France, which was a crossing between Grenache and Cabernet Sauvignon. It has characteristics that complement the Cabernet Sauvignon quite nicely. The blend on this is 90% Cabernet Sauvignon with 10% of Marselean. Once the wine's been blended, it ages for a year in oak barrels, French oak barrels. I would assume a high proportion of those are new, but I don't have a detail of what percentage that would. And I also don't know what size the barrels are, so I would presume they're either barrique or possibly 500 litre barrels. So let's see what we make of the wine, shall we? First thing I would mention is that it's got a really deep dark colour. It's completely opaque. There's a vibrancy to the colour. It has a sort of a purple note at the rim, otherwise sort of a ruby red to almost ruby red to black core. It's 14.5% alcohol, and it's throwing some mighty tears on the sides of the glass there. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? The aromas are rich, ripe. They're sort of chocolatey, there's licorice, there's ripe boysenberry fruit, there's some quite sort of lifted, aromatic, almost sort of peony notes, floral notes, peonies, that sort of thing. And I suppose part of the ripeness, there's a slight raisined note as well. So let's taste and see what we make of it. Much as I was expecting, that's a rich, ripe wine. As I say, it's 14.5% alcohol. It's full-bodied. You've got supple tannins. They've got a velvety texture. There's a cedary oak note underlying that velvetiness, giving a little bit of sort of sweet spice bite. As a concentration of the fruit, it's sort of licorice. There's a bitter licorice note on the finish. There's a bit of warmth coming from the alcohol there, which is helping to peak up those sweet spice notes ever so slightly. But yes, there's quite good grip on the finish. There's the rounded, rich fruit. It's stopped from being too sort of fat and juicy by these sort of cedary cinnamon notes coming through. They're slightly drying at the end, and there's some sort of rich red fruit as well. I think this is very much the sort of style that I've seen coming from Ningxia. It's a rich, ripe, opulent wine with quite generous new oak, all very nicely integrated, lovely and harmonious, with supple tannins, relatively full-bodied, quite rich and alcoholic, but with a nice balance. I mean, the alcohol is high, but it's stopped from being too hot and doesn't close up the finish by the fact that there's plenty of juicy fruit. I guess the acidity's relatively fresh as well. I mean, it's not intruding, but it's enough to keep the dark fruit juicy to the end of the finish there. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this interesting. This was Chateau Vegani's Earl of Lanshan Reserve 929 Cabernet Sauvignon and Marselean, a wine I think is sort of typical of a new wave of wines coming out of Ningxia in China that I think we're going to see a lot more of. So if you've enjoyed the tasting, do please like and share. If you've got any comments, we'd love to hear what you think, either about the tastings, about the wine, or any other related matters. Do please consider signing up and following us on YouTube. It would be fantastic to have your support. But most importantly, I do hope you'll join us for another tasting again soon in the very near future. Goodbye for now.